All right. Okay. We'll go ahead and get started. I know I've had a few apologies. So, well, welcome to our final push to finish up Genesis after however long it's been that we've been working on it. So we're into the Joseph story now. So things kind of take a turn for us. So before we get started, why don't we have a word of prayer? Loving God, we dedicate our time together this morning to you. We give you thanks for the many ways in which you enhance our lives, in the way that you come alongside of us and lead us, in the ways that you comfort us and assure us. We give you thanks for all of those, and we give you thanks for the opportunity to gather together today to study your word. Open our hearts and our minds to the message that you have for each one of us. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. All right. So I've been starting, I think the last set of sessions we had, looking up which portions of our reading appear in the lectionary so that we might know what might be familiar and what might not. So I thought it was really interesting. None of what we're going to cover today is in the lectionary. Yeah.
Yes,
Which is,
know the story.
we all know the story. Yeah. I thought that was kind of interesting. We'll get to a couple of passages a bit later on. I don't know if it's because it's very much now moved to story mode. I mean, you could probably sense sort of a change in the narrative as you read through it. And I don't know, I think that lends itself, takes a whole chapter to tell, one particular episode. Maybe not as easy to chop up 10 verses that encapsulate it. But for whatever reason, we know the story, but not from hearing it preached on through the lectionary. So there you go. So we'll start in chapter 39. And as I mentioned, certainly thinking about some of the bits of Genesis that we've read previously, I thought, as I reread this in the last week or so, the narrative quality seems to have changed. It's kind of got a different pace to it, and seems focused on different kinds of things. More readable. Yeah, it does kind of feel that way.
So we finished with most of the funny names as well.
Yeah.
Apart from the Egyptian one.
Yeah. So I was thinking about a couple of reasons why that might be. Certainly, we talked way back when we started in Genesis about the different influences and different eras in which it was compiled and edited, and how, if you're really smart, you can tell where those are because of different clues in the text and so forth. So certainly the storytelling bit was the Yahwistic school, so it's moved back to that. Perhaps it's been there for a little while because it's been really since the whole Joseph saga began, it's had kind of that quality. The other thing I thought about was, because I also noticed when I was making notes that I had a lot fewer notes along the lines of, here's what the Hebrew meant, or some of those kinds of clues. And I wondered if part of it is that now that we're in Egypt with Pharaoh, probably not that many of us are Egyptologists, but we have a concept of that, right? I mean, we can visualize Pharaoh, we can visualize ancient Egypt to some extent. We certainly probably know a little more about the history of Egypt than maybe we do the history of Babylon or some of the other ancient Near East
Well, the
nations.
Egyptians weren't nomadic, were they?
No,
They stayed by
they stayed where they were.
by the river, so they established
Yeah,
cities and
yeah. So
ports. And,
yeah, so I think I do think I wonder if that is part of it too, that I didn't find myself having to look up names or places in the same way that I had been. So I don't know if that's the answer or not, but
yeah, and this time, by now, the pyramids were
Yes.
thousands of years old already.
that's it. That's it. Yeah, yeah. So it's interesting to think about this familiar story, and then think about. I was thinking about some of the documentaries and things that I've watched about, all these various temples, along the Nile. Some of you may have been there, I don't know, but just what I've seen on film, and thinking about how impressive they are today, but how probably much more impressive they were when they were intact and when they were in use. And then to kind of take this story and put it on that stage, especially when Joseph, ascends to his place of authority. It was, I don't know, it was helpful to me to kind of think in those terms. But before we get to where he gets some authority, some bumps in the road. Joseph, when we left off, had been rescued from the pit that his brothers had thrown him into, essentially sold into slavery or servitude, and he winds up in Egypt, serving in the house of Potiphar. So, one thing you'll notice, especially if your Bible at home was an NIV Bible, I haven't looked it up in the others, but Potiphar in the beginning of chapter 39 is referred to by name multiple times, which in and of itself is nothing remarkable, except that in the original Hebrew, the only time his name appears is in that first verse. And every other time that Potiphar is mentioned, he is named as Joseph's master. And so there's much more of a sense in that original Hebrew of this power differential and this relation, certainly the relationship that Joseph, I don't know if he was a slave per se, but essentially, that sort of power dynamics between the master and the servant. So it really would emphasize that he was at the lowest rung of that household in terms of his position.
I think the Egyptians had as like a caste system, not like Hindus and that.
Yeah.
And probably foreigners probably were lower down than that.
Yeah, I suspect so. Yeah. Yeah, he definitely would have stood out in there. And we'll talk about that in a little bit here when he gets in front of Pharaoh, some of the reasons he would have stood out. So the story progresses and sets up the action. He very quickly gains the trust of Potiphar, who seems to just put him in charge of everything very quickly. And if you'll notice at the end of verse 6, at the kind of beginning of the very last bit there on the page, it says, "Now Joseph was well built and handsome." Obviously, that's an important detail, probably pertaining to what's going to happen next. But, again, in the Hebrew, that is word for word the same description of Rachel, his mother, in chapter 29, verse 17. I have it, so you don't have to look it up. The NIV translates it, Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. So passage here is Joseph was well built and handsome. So you can see but in the Hebrew it is this exact same
It's not a sort of
wording.
male and female version.
No. So, so he was very much, I don't know if you call it a chip off the old block, but certainly he had that, and that description of Rachel is, when she first appears at the well, and that, that's Jacob's, first assessment of her. So, so anyway, he has some sort of physical attractiveness, physical beauty to him. Let's see. So, Potiphar's wife puts the moves on him, and
This would have been one of Potiphar's wives, probably, wouldn't it?
could have been, yeah, I don't know. That's a good point. But in any event, I think the last time we met, or when in the previous session, we talked about that I'd seen in a lot of commentaries about the importance of a character's first speech when they appear. That in the Old Testament especially, it tends to reveal their character and aspects of their character. I don't know if that applies to major characters or big characters or whatever, but in verse 8 we have Potiphar's wife's first speech, which is "come to bed with me," which, if that tradition holds true, sets up her character. I mean, to be fair, her role in this is fairly one-dimensional anyway, but and then, so Joseph refuses. Look at his speech in verse 8 and forward. "With me in charge, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am." Does that kind of think about the first time we see him and he goes out to his brothers, right? And we talked about, he's the little brother who's got the smart mouth and the ego to go along with it. So you kind of see some of that. I
He's
think
self-confident, isn't he?
he's very confident. Yes.
Cocky.
And maybe that's the reason he seems to, obviously we'll see throughout this story, he has some sort of charisma that encourages people to trust him, or, he winds up in places of trust very easily. He loses that occasionally, but he seems to have established himself with Potiphar very quickly. In the next chapter, when he's in prison, he befriends the jailer and all those kinds of things. So, so despite some of that we might think is kind of standoffish behavior, he's obviously got some other qualities as well. So what happens? What happens in this episode here? What's the outcome of it?
Well, she catches him unawares and accuses him of rape.
Yeah.
Seems to have run off without his clothes on as well, according to this, but quite.
It's only his coat.
Without his,
Well-
he says about his robe, it's just in his white front, sort of.
And but what's important about that is that she
She's got evidence.
takes it. Well, she has evidence,
Yeah.
but she takes it from him. So there's parallels to what happened right before his brothers got rid of him. They took his coat of many colors, right?
Yeah.
So there's kind of a little pattern here with he's stripped of his garments, his clothing, and then ultimately, what happens at the end? I mean, he winds up where? In prison. So, again, the Hebrew here is pit, which is the same word as the cistern that the brothers throw him into at the beginning. So he's stripped of his garment and into the pit.
She stalked him, really, didn't she?
She did stalk him, yeah.
He was very fanciful.
But
Yes.
maybe, I mean, but he didn't seem, he didn't take the idea of mustn't be alone with this, but make sure I'm always with someone else with this lady.
Well, they didn't have safeguarding back then,
No,
John,
no.
So.
It probably did, but it wasn't written down.
But he didn't appear flattered at all, did he?
No.
He said, thanks very much, but no, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Well, he knew where his print was bought, didn't he?
yeah.
He did try to avoid her though, because it says that in verse 10, doesn't it?
He did, yeah. He refused.
Or to be with her, so so
Or
he could be alone, so he was
He's trying to avoid her.
Mm-hmm.
But she's more cunning. We've had cunning ladies been earlier in this.
They
In
are.
this
Beware a woman scorned.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I think, just looking at this note I made, see if it makes any sense here. Yeah, so the bit in verse 10, he refused to go to bed with her or even to be with her. So in the Hebrew, it changes, her condition changes, not to sleep with her, but just to come lie by her, is kind of what the intent is there. Yeah, and so then she frames him, and so what I think is interesting too in this is he's accused of raping another man's wife. So think back to the story of Tamar that was just Judah and Tamar, just a chapter before that, and she's accused of getting pregnant outside of being married. And what's the punishment that's pronounced on her? Do you remember? Judah's going to have her executed. Yeah. So I mean, obviously it's Egypt, so maybe their penal structure was different, but it does kind of strike me that, wow, surprised that he didn't get killed. I mean,
there's no evidence of any trial or anything like that. So
no, but I don't think there was going to be a trial for Tamar either. I think it was just
maybe he just thought in prison he was going to get any day he was going to get a knife in his back.
Well, that could be. I'm sure it wasn't a luxury situation. So he winds up in prison. We get into chapter 40, and
with
dreams.
With the king's prison, so he's at the. He's not with the.
Yeah.
With your common thief.
So Potiphar is described as one of Pharaoh's officials, captain of the guard, at the beginning of 39. So probably would have had access to those kinds of, was acting as part of Pharaoh's court in that way. But yeah, he winds up in prison with the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. So ultimately this chapter is about their dreams and how he's able to interpret them, and how that pays off for him eventually. But it's important to know that in Egypt at this time, interpretation of dreams was regarded as a science and was performed by well-trained practitioners. So Joseph, of course, points to God as the source of interpretation, who will reveal it to a properly attuned person who just happens to be Joseph. So his interpretations, I would imagine, would have come with a bit of uncertainty for the Egyptians because he's not a designated. In Hebrew, instead of interpretation, it uses the word solution. He delivers the solution to their dreams. He solves their dreams.
Doesn't say why these two other guys from the king's company, why they were in prison in the first place.
No?
Does it?
Yeah?
Yeah, we just
Upset Pharaoh.
Yeah, but it doesn't say why they were in prison. I mean, he's in there because of attempted rape, but I mean, it doesn't say why they...
It says the Pharaoh was angry
Yeah.
with his two officials.
Yeah.
Maybe Potiphar's wife was.
We had some bad wine and a good
Yeah.
dodgy bread.
Yeah. So the chief cupbearer would be the sort of the food taster for Pharaoh. Would have been the one that has to do all of that. And the chief baker would apparently be the one that would provide the food to be tested. So, yeah, not entirely clear. But they each have a dream. What did you think about the dreams? Anything jump out to you?
They're rather obvious, isn't it? Why didn't they work out anything for themselves at all? Well, there's the number 7 in it as well, but
It's
Okay.
much easier to think of that
3
when
days.
you've been
Yes,
given
yeah.
them.
3 days, yeah.
Yeah. I had that experience this
they
morning.
obviously didn't talk to each other about the dreams because they both dreamed about 7.
Yeah.
Well, they said they did, but they don't mention that. Oh, it happened to be 7 things in vogue. But was 7 a magic number for the Egyptians? Just
Well, this one's 3. The seven's coming up in a little bit,
Yeah,
but there is numerology going on in this.
Ah.
So think of it this way: in this story of Joseph, there are
I'm sorry, it's 3. The first
Yeah.
one of mine.
There are 3 sets of 2 dreams. So if you remember, when at the very beginning of the story, he goes out to his brothers and he tells them about his 2 dreams. And in those, the number, although I kind of disagree a little bit with this, but the number in those is 12. It's the brothers bowing down to him, who I guess he's the 12th. But in the
Or
second,
his father, maybe. His
Well-
brother, his father.
yeah, well, in the second dream, it's the brothers and the father, and they're all, the sun and the moon and the stars are all bowing down to him, who's not identified as any of those. So I think the numbers could be a little wonky, but I think the idea is it's certainly showing the 12 in that
It's
first.
possible someone's inserted the numbers later on just to try and get some significance into it.
Well, I would say with the 12, that's probably, original, because these are going to be the 12 tribes.
Yeah.
So the others, I mean, very well could be. So the second set, this is the second set, and there's 3 in each. And then the third set is going to be Pharaoh's dreams. And in that dream, there's 7.
Yeah, sorry.
So 7 and 3 are definite. Well, I mean, 12 is obviously an important number because of the 12 tribes. 7, we've talked repeatedly, is completeness.
Creation.
Yeah.
7 plus 3 is 10.
Yeah. So, again, numerology, take it for what it is. But it may also have been sort of a feature of details like that. You think about these stories were originally orally transmitted for generations. I mean, that's a way to help remember the story. If you can kind of group those details like that.
I can also imagine them sort of stretching the story up because they repeat the description of the dreams, we're not just here, repeated, aren't they?
Yeah.
Even though we've just read it, while we're reading, right around
Yeah.
to read it again.
Well, I think
this sort of shaggy dog story holding people's attention.
I think that probably is. I mean, just in the story with Potiphar's wife, the event happens and is described, and then she embellishes a bit, but I mean, it's essentially a retelling of what we already know, and we've seen that repeatedly through all of this. I think it goes back to some of that is probably originally.
Is that why we find this whole thing a different sort of breed to earlier on? Part of the story.
It could be. It could be. Has some of that quality. I mean, certainly. Well, I mean, just thinking. I think when we approach the Joseph story, there's various influences on how we read it, right? I mean, there's obviously the musical, which in the last 50 years has been wildly popular and has shaped probably some of our imagery of it. It's a story. Where else do we know the Joseph story from? Is that why it seems familiar to us?
Sunday school.
Sunday school.
Yeah.
But did you know the whole
boy Samuel? All those sort of.
Yeah.
Samson,
But probably. But I'm thinking about Sunday school. I mean, I remember the story, being told the story of Joseph and his coat, and he gets thrown in the pit. I really don't remember the rest of the story.
None of this.
Yeah. Anyway, I just think it's interesting to think about, and maybe that's just me. I had other things to do when I was 7. I don't know, but
I don't think I ever heard the story about the Potiphar's wife.
Yeah.
We didn't get that in Sunday
He
school.
ended up in
No.
prison, but the bit about how he gets to meet Pharaoh.
yeah.
Yeah.
But you need to know that it's Pharaoh.
Yeah.
Pushes him up the ladder.
So anyway, so Joseph interprets these dreams, very matter-of-factly. Well, you're going to be fine. You're not. That's how it goes. And lo and behold, on the 3rd day, so another 3 for that story, Pharaoh releases the baker and executes the baker and releases the cupbearer. Yeah. So it is interesting that the Hebrew word that's translated here as impaled really generally means hanging. But a couple of the sources I read said there's very little evidence that hanging was ever really used as a means of execution in the ancient Near East. So they've chosen impaled because that would have been more likely to be stone. Yeah, stone would have been common as well. So I don't know if that was maybe more an Egyptian style of anyway. For what it's worth, now you know. So he tells the cupbearer, "Remember me and speak well of me to Pharaoh. Get me out of this place." So what does the cupbearer do? Forgot about it. Yeah. And it's in verse 15 that he uses that term pit again, which ties it back into the very beginning of the story. So we go on to chapter 41.
2 years have passed.
2 years.
Imagine that caption coming along the top.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because it really doesn't give a sense of really any time frames. How long was he held by the Ishmaelites or whoever it was that picked him up out of the pit? How long did it take him to get down to Egypt? How long had he been, maybe that's some of what's...
to get to the top of Potiphar's...
Well, that's it, yeah. We read it and it happens in, 6 or 7 verses that suddenly he's in charge of Potiphar's household, but probably it took a little time to do that. But anyway, so we know it's 2 more years. That
Later
he's,
on, it does give his age, doesn't it?
yeah, I think it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's 30 something.
Yes, it does when he has children.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so 2 more years have passed, and Pharaoh has a couple of dreams. So these dreams, if you really stop and think about what's going on in these dreams, you can probably understand why Pharaoh would have woken up in a sweat from, I mean, some pretty graphic stuff going on there.
Cows eating each other.
Yeah, yeah. In verse 8, it says, in the morning his mind was troubled. What the Hebrew literally there is his spirit pounded, which I think is much more, has a much more acerbic kind of sense to it. His spirit pounded. He was so upset. And then what? The chief cupbearer. Oh, I know this guy. Yeah, and so based on their recommendation, Pharaoh summons Joseph to come
Well,
forward.
Pharaoh couldn't get any of the locals to do it, could he? They couldn't interpret it for him.
No. So Joseph. So here's some little interesting background stuff. So in verse 14, it says, Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. So, in all that we've read in Genesis so far, with all of the sometimes strange rituals and requirements of things, have we come across a story where someone shaved? No.
It's very modern, isn't it?
Well, it sounds that way.
The Egyptians shaved.
The Egyptians shaved, and that's the thing. And when you think of it, think of your visions of Pharaoh, right? He's, I mean, clean shaven. So the Egyptians were really one of the few cultures in that part of the world that really embraced shaving, that were very concerned with being clean shaven. Often also refers to the head. So you think about a lot of the images we have of these ancient Egyptian rulers and people. I mean, a lot of times the heads are shaved. I didn't really find out what the reason was. It may have been, religious in some way. But on the one hand, it just seems like kind of an odd comment to make. But that would be why.
It goes with their settled existence, doesn't it? If you're walking around with your sheep all the time, you've got to shave regularly.
No.
Even if you wanted to.
No. But, but I do think, after I read that and thought more about it, I mean, you think about, part of our imagination is probably supplied by films and things we've seen of, depicting biblical stories. But I mean, when Moses comes down from the mountain, he's got a big old beard on, right? I mean, you think about, when we were reading the bits about Abraham or Noah, I mean, in my mind.
The musical doesn't have him with a beard at the start, does it? The musical.
I don't know.
Clean shaven all the way.
Oh, well, maybe we should write Andrew Lloyd Webber.
Oh, don't worry.
Have him
it's not
amended.
well.
Tim Rice who wrote the
Tim Rice. Well, anyway, but it's just an interesting thing to think about. It was not just, we're just cleaning him up. I mean, you can imagine he's spent the last at least 2 years in this dungeon.
Yeah.
So we're going to spruce him up a little bit before we send him to court. But the shaving was really to meet their standards as opposed to just.
when he was in charge at Potiphar's, he was probably shaving then.
Could have been, yeah, could have been.
Because he would be part of the reflecting the.
Yeah. So
chaperone.
Yeah,
Yes.
probably hurt. Thank you.
Sounds like a meeting going on.
So the other thing he gets in that transition is new garments. And again, part of it is dressing for the occasion, but reminds us that every time he's thrown in the pit, he's had his current garments taken away. And his garments will change again in just a bit. So Pharaoh tells his dreams. Here's some of that repetition we were talking about earlier. We've already had the description of the dream. Pharaoh restates what happens in his dream. And then in verse 25, Joseph says to Pharaoh, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he's about to do." So Joseph has assumed that position of being the attentive one who's receiving this guidance from God to interpret the dreams.
So would he have used presumably Pharaoh had his own God.
Yes.
Would he have identified that it was his God rather than Pharaoh's God? Do you see
So
what-
They probably had a whole family of gods, didn't they?
Well, exactly.
they would have. So if you go down to verse 30.
God has revealed to Pharaoh.
Yes. So, for example, in verse 38, which is a little further down,
Right.
in 37:4, the plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. So Pharaoh asked them, "Can we find anyone like this man?" That Joseph had identified that they need to find someone who can do this. "Can we find anyone like this man? One in whom is the Spirit of God." Now, Pharaoh uses the term Elohim for Spirit of God. And Elohim is one of the Hebrew words that often is used in the Bible as an address to the God of Israel.
Is that when in verse 25 when he says that the dreams actually were sent to Pharaoh by God deliberately?
Yeah. Well,
But it's all part of God's plan that Joseph's going to eventually get to the top of the tree through this.
Well, it could be. Now, I don't know the other places where God is named in this narrative. They might all be Elohim. I just found the one note for it, tied with 38. But so Elohim, which probably in 98% of the rest of the time it appears in the Bible is a reference to God. Elohim also can mean divine spirit. So it's kind of a slippery use of that term, because Joseph can say Elohim and mean the God of Israel, but at the same time he can do that safely around Pharaoh, because Pharaoh can understand it as this divine spirit, which could be Ra or whoever the Egyptian, God might be. So I don't think this is not a case that he suddenly converted Pharaoh to becoming a monotheist.
No.
Why his regular astrologers or interpreters can't get anywhere with it,
Well,
because it's not from their gods that they know.
that could be. Yeah.
It's from a god.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be sort of it's kind of an act of witness on Joseph's behalf to say, my God will explain this to you that no one else is able to explain. And you might think of it in terms of Pharaoh receiving that, might say, oh, maybe I ought to check out this God of yours, but it doesn't, he obviously trusts Joseph. He obviously rewards Joseph for making these interpretations, because he promotes him, again, very quickly to a very high office. But, I mean, I think, if you think about when Moses goes before Pharaoh, and the plagues are going on and all of that, and he's arguing with Pharaoh. Pharaoh finally says, go. But I don't think it's because Pharaoh says, you know what, your God is better than my God. He's either probably just fed up with it, or, yeah, once the plagues stop, or he's like, well, I'll give you a half-hour head start and I'm going to come, you know, wipe you out or whatever. But I mean, even in the face of that sort of, you know, Moses says these things are going to happen, and then they happen, and they're, you know, supernatural in nature. Pharaoh doesn't suddenly say, oh, the God of Israel is the one true God. I mean, there's never that sense of conversion. So I think it's kind of a similar thing here, that Pharaoh maybe likes the fact that his dreams were interpreted, and so he's going to keep this guy around, but he doesn't really need to invest in this guy's God, because he's got the connection, so if I need him,
Yeah, he'll do it.
I know a guy, you know, type of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nothing about the Nile not flooding or anything like that, is there, which is what you'd expect with these famines and that, because the whole of Egypt, according to archaeology anyway,
Yeah.
depends on the Nile
Yeah.
flooding. That's what they had, the river gods and what have you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm presuming it was the Nile that was not flooding that caused the famine.
Well, it does talk about, at some point it talks about the wind from the east. Where was that?
Oh, yes.
23.
Yeah. So the wind from the east would have, you know, been coming in across the desert. It would have been dry and arid, and it doesn't exactly, I don't know that it, does it point to that as the cause? I can't remember. Oh, that's in the dream. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he's saying that's what.
Doesn't say what causes the reaction. I mean,
No.
that actually, the importance of the Nile was not, well, it doesn't mention the river at all, is it?
No.
I mean, that's the reason Egypt was there.
Yeah.
Was,
Yeah. But obviously something fairly catastrophic, you know, is going to
they
happen
didn't
with this
understand,
family.
they didn't understand where it was coming from.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. Yeah, so Joseph then, in the space of about 6 verses, is in charge of Egypt.
Gets all the trimmings, the ring,
Pretty-
the chariot.
Yeah. Gets a new garment.
People have to bow down to it.
Yeah.
That's like his coat of many colours again, isn't
It
it?
is.
Gets,
It's
Make-
almost
one
like a,
fine
make
linen.
way.
yes. Yeah, almost like a restoration of sorts. Yeah. Pharaoh gives him an Egyptian name and a wife. Now it's interesting that the wife is the daughter of Potipharah, which is very close to Potiphar. Potipharah is apparently a priest. Potiphar was in charge of the captain of the guard, so they don't appear to be the same. I don't know if it was just a very common variation on a common name or whatever, but that's just kind of interesting. Or maybe it was in there for, I don't know. I didn't really find much about
You don't
that.
get anything about what those names mean.
No, no. Well, probably if I
They're not Hebrew.
kept looking. No, they're not. They're not. But what's interesting is, so a little further down in verse 50, it talks about he has 2 sons during that time, and their names are Manasseh and Ephraim, which will sound familiar to us because they come up again later in the biblical story. I guess they are somewhat Egyptian, although each of them sounds very much like a Hebrew word. And so the suggestion is that, again, there's kind of this mix of sort of like what we saw with Elohim, that it's a Hebrew name, but it sounds Egyptian, or it's an Egyptian name, but it sounds Hebrew. And so it kind of satisfies that position that he occupies, that he's Hebrew, but he's in charge of Egypt, so he's got to kind of play to both sides. So Manasseh sounds like, and may be derived from the Hebrew word to forget. So maybe he's forgetting the ordeals of his past, and he has this new life and power, perhaps. Ephraim sounds like the Hebrew word for twice fruitful, which as a second child, that kind of fits. And we've seen throughout there's been symbolism with the names of the children of the
There's been an Ephraim earlier on, isn't there? Isn't there?
could be.
Well,
I don't think it's been.
After Adam.
No, I may have to check. I'm not sure. I'll have to look that up.
I mean, it was a name for a second child or a second boy.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, well, yeah, and he does say in here, Manasseh is because God made me forget all my trouble and my father's household. So he says he's forgotten them, but we'll find out next week. He's not really forgotten
Don't
them.
give the story.
I don't
Oh.
know. Nobody's going to read it now. I know. Yeah, and so he does as he suggested to Pharaoh. He really sort of forces all this food to be collected. And it's interesting, when, at the very end of the chapter, when the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt. And all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe everywhere, which will lead into why the brothers come. But I just thought it was interesting. They're basically demanding, when you harvest this year, we want, I don't know if it said how much they took, a fifth of it,
Yeah.
and they're storing all of it. And so when the famine comes, well, now you can buy it, but that's the way government works, isn't it? So, yeah, just kind of an interesting interesting detail. What else? What did I miss? Anything else strike you or have questions about in those few chapters?
He's only 30 years old, so I mean it's all gone very quickly.
Yes.
I mean, 14 of those are the,
Before he even gets on to Egypt, aren't they?
is that before he gets married? Are the 14 of those before he's 30? I can't see where it says 30 now.
No, it's during the 7 years of abundance that he had his children.
Yes. So, yeah. So he's in his in his mid
Oh,
thirties.
he's 30 when he actually started the service for the
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Then you've got
Fair enough.
another,
Yeah.
but all that's happened.
Seven,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
For me, the key verse actually is, well, part of 20, verse 20 in 39. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favour in the eyes of the prison warder. To me, that, because, God did that, evidently.
Mm-hmm.
He and the prison warder got on.
Yeah.
If that hadn't happened, what else would have, that, to me, that is the key
Yeah.
verse.
God's persistent presence with him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if he hadn't got on with that prison warder, none of the rest would have happened. Well, he might have found, God would have found another person.
Would have done something else.
Do you know what I mean?
But the other thing that's interesting about that, I'm glad you pointed that out, is that's a little bit of a change from how we've understood God in relation to sort of the main characters up to this point, right? I mean, with Abraham, God shows up and, covenants with him multiple times and occasionally checks in on him, but it's very much like God's there, but really in the background someplace, and Abraham's just trying to do his thing, and that kind of, even with Jacob, God comes to him in the dream, or God comes to him and wrestles with him, but most of the rest of the time, God isn't even really in the story so much, and so really to see that notion that the Lord was with him in that bit, I think is sort of maybe reflects a different understanding of God and God's presence.
A different author, as you
Yeah,
mentioned right at the very beginning.
Yeah,
Different author.
yeah. So that is,
Different way of
good.
thinking. Yeah.
Do you think all this about Joseph in Egypt is actually all about one person, or is it about a whole load of bits and pieces that have been strung together to make a sort of coherent? I don't know. I mean, in a way, it's almost leading up to, Moses. You can't do the story of Moses without having this. Well, how did they get in Egypt in the first place?
Yeah.
Because none of it turns up. There's no mention of any of these people or any reference to any of these sort of families or that in any of the Egyptian.
Yeah.
I know we're looking at it in a different way.
Yeah.
But this isn't the way Egypt's described here isn't the way it appears on what's left of it.
Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying. I mean, I suppose probably there's not really an answer to that, in that, again, stories that are passed down like this have dual purposes. They try to tell a history, but they're also trying to explain why things are the way they are. And so, I mean, I think if you think back over this whole spread of this narrative across Genesis, and you think about, well, I don't know. I mean, can we take some of the stories in Genesis and say, well, that clearly is just trying to make sense of, of why something's the way it is, or is that an authentic story or legend about, this actual person?
I mean, we don't take Noah's Ark seriously, as I said,
Yeah.
but it's in the same book.
That's it, yeah. So, yeah,
I mean,
so,
we take the message that's given,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
not necessarily the way it's
yeah.
presented.
So, I mean, I think it's down to us. Now, I mean, these stories are obviously written much differently than you think about, like the language and the structure of like the first few chapters with creation and Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden and all that sort of thing. I mean, this feels like a very different kind of story. It has more of a, perhaps because it has a more specific setting. I mean, we know
Location,
Egypt
isn't it?
was,
We don't know where the Garden of Eden was, but
Yeah.
we know where Egypt
yeah, we know
know
a little bit about Egypt, and so this feels like, oh, well, this could happen. Yeah, I think that's why we keep coming back to him, and I mean, I think depending on what your opinion of it is, you can certainly take something away from these stories in the same way you can take something away from the story of Noah or the story of Adam and Eve, whether or not they literally happened the way that it says that they did. You know, there are,
because you get this in other traditions as well. I mean, founding of Rome, Romulus and Remus,
yeah,
founding of all the Greek gods and all that.
Yeah.
Because
yeah,
they've all got and the Egyptians themselves, but the Egyptians were there
yeah,
first. In a
that's
way.
right, yeah, yeah, and they would have had their panoply of gods and were very religious. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, you think about, it's all about the burial and
All the ones with
the journey to the next wife and all of that, you know, with the pyramids and everything. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's just, this provides a basis for why the Hebrews are in Egypt. It explains the story of the 12 tribes. I mean, it's central to the story of the nation of Israel in those ways. Yeah. I don't know.
Sorry.
I can't give you the definitive answer.
No, just throw it in, you know.
Yeah. But I think it's worth thinking about. I mean, in all the biblical literature, I mean, there are aspects of it that, I mean, we can't document or prove, or there are bits of it that obviously we can, but it doesn't negate the value of, obviously these stories were included when all this was put together thousands of years ago, because it was very important that you taught your children these stories, that they knew them and that they passed them on. So, yeah, I think it's just kind of how worth looking at and thinking about and seeing what what we can take away from it. Right. Anything else? All right. Well, I'm going to disconnect the phone in a second because I have to use it to play my music I selected. I've been fighting the temptation to just keep going back to the soundtrack of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Maybe next week. But what I was thinking about, what I was thinking about this weekend was Joseph's long journey from the pit that his brothers threw him in to the pit that Potiphar put him in, and then eventually to essentially being in charge of Egypt. And I was thinking about how it must have been at those lowest points, and actually the verse you lifted up kind of goes into this too, that God's presence with him at those moments. So it gives me an excuse to play a bit of bluegrass music and one of my favorite old-timey gospel songs, Precious Lord, Take My Hand. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it.